Today, I'm really excited to present to you Dr. Robert S. Brown, who retired from the Toronto District School Board's Research and Development Department in 2019, following 35 years in applied research. He is adjunct professor at York University in the Faculty of Education and in Critical Disability Studies. He has authored or co-authored works in a number of fields, including education, psychology, sociology, medicine, and economics. And with him today is Dr. David Walters, a professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the University of Guelph. Guelph. His primary substantive areas of research focus on school-to-work transitions of post-secondary graduates. He is currently working with several colleagues on a large government-funded project and is also project director of a SSHRC partnership-based project involving more than 20 organizations, including universities, school boards, and businesses that advocate on behalf of disadvantaged youth. So welcome to our speakers today. I'm going to share their presentation so you can all see it. And I'll turn it over to both of you. Here we go.
I guess so. This basically is
I muted you, Rob. I'm so sorry. Trying to mute myself. Can you unmute yourself? I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Am I able to talk now?
You're on. Sorry.
Always good. Okay. Okay. So basically, it's got a nice long title: Disability Apprenticeship, Access, Outcomes, and Future Earnings. And I guess so. Basically, what this is really doing is we put sort of two families of data sets together. Maybe go to slide 2. There, yeah, almost there.
Should I go forward or back?
Yeah, go to the next slide. Go to slide 2, please. The one says data. Yeah.
Okay.
I can't see it. I can only see okay. I guess you're in oh, there we go. Oh, there was for a second. You see, anyways, let me just sort of we can at least sort of go with this. So basically, the data comes from sort of 4 large data sets. First of all, we're looking at data from the Toronto District School Board grade 9 cohort data set. So basically what this means is these are students who started in grade 9 the TDSB between fall 2004 and fall 2009. So there's sort of there's about 102,000 in total, and it sort of adds up after a while. So it's basically administrative data from these high school years, and this was connected to basically what I call Stats Canada land. That is the 3 data sets from Stats Canada's education and labor market longitudinal platform. And specifically, what this does is it gives you you get rid of all identifiers, and then they put in their own Stats Canada identifier, and then you can actually link it to the Stats Canada data. So we've got 3 data sets that we've been looking at here. First of all, these are wonderful acronyms. So just I'm apologizing in advance for all these acronyms. So the first one is called with the wonderful name of Registered Apprenticeship Information System, or RIAS. So those are students, like everything who on people who've gone into apprenticeship between basically early, so it was really sort of 2008 on up to 2020, 2021. And then we have something called the Postsecondary Student Information System, or PSIS, and likewise, it started about 2008 seriously, going up to the 2021 school year. And then the T1 family file. This is income tax information going up to 2020. So the combination of the 3 were all sort of put together along with the TDSB data for these about and change students. So next slide. So now what we're really focusing on here is apprenticeship. Now, when I started this process, I was sort of thinking that there, like I had knowledge of about 3 or 4 apprenticeship, plumbing, electrician, that sort of. And so I was surprised to find that there were actually 144 different registered trades in Ontario. And so now that the key point here is that and this is a key point there, 23 are compulsory and 51 are listed as red seal trades. So now we'll get a little bit to what that means. Compulsory means that to work there, you have to be a registered apprentice or hold a certificate of qualification or provisional certificate. And that's one of the key things we're going to be looking at is who gets those certificates to legally work in those trades. So that's a compulsory trades, of which we have 23. Then there's voluntary trades. That means you don't actually have to be a registered apprenticeship or journeyman, which is, if you look by a little bit of process of elimination, the majority of them. Now, red seal trades, that's a little bit of a different, that's a sort of a related but different topic. That means that these certificates of qualification are valid across Canada. So the qualification in Ontario should be the same as qualification for, say, British Columbia or Alberta. So that's the sort of general overall view about trades. Now I'm going to go to the next slide. And the next slide is lots of lines. So I'm going to explain those. This is looking at our 1,590 students who had been in the TDSB, and then they basically went elsewhere. So what we're looking at here are all the different outcomes, and there's a lot of lines, and I'm just sort of basically going to briefly summarize. Basically, about 3/4 of students, or 74%, pursued a university or college pathways. University is the largest single group, but also a substantial number of college. So that's basically slightly under 3/4. About 20%, a little bit over 20%, did not go on to post-secondary. That is, in Canada, and that's pretty much it. Very tiny group might have gone outside Canada. Basically, in other words, as far as we know, looking through the pieces process, they may have a certain proportion graduated but didn't go on, but most of those students did not graduate from the TDSB. So we're talking about a fifth of students who didn't go to post-secondary. So what we're left with is slightly under 5%. To be exact, 4.5% of students who were in the apprenticeship pathways. So that means that according to the RIAS data, we had them in there as basically apprenticeship at one point or another up to the sort of 2020 calendar year. And we've actually fought 4 groups. And this goes back to that earlier slide about red seal and non-red seal. So we basically got about slightly under 1% with red seal certificates, 0.7% specifically. And basically we got 0.4% with non-red seal certificates. So in other words, the majority of the certificates are actually in these 51 red seal programs across Canada. But if you actually look a little bit, basically what this means is that around 1/4 of the students who ended up going into apprenticeship had, at least the last time we were able to look at this information, a certificate showing that they basically completed their apprenticeship process successfully. So basically a little bit over 1/4. I always figured it'd go up to something like 1/3 if we follow them even longer. But still, we're talking about somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of students under the most optimistic conditions will end up with a certificate. Another quick note, by the way, before I go on, we also know that of that 4.5%, slightly over half actually had post-secondary information as well. That is, we've looked at that as in other reports in terms of what happened in terms of the parallel post-secondary. Generally, they took post-secondary first, and then they would have gone into apprenticeship. But we're sort of interpreting them purely in terms of apprenticeship for this point. So that's basically the quick overview. So in other words, 3/4 of the students, some sort of post-secondary university or college, about 1/5 not getting any post-secondary or apprenticeship, and about slightly under 5% in apprenticeship, of which only 1.1% got a certificate. Now, the next slide, and this is I think a key point, is now we're looking at disability across pathways. By disability here, we're talking about special education records. So the term disability is a broad one. We don't have, in this case, other information, but we're looking at in terms of students who had basically sort of special education needs in the TDSB. That proportion of this group, and it's gone up since then, but it was about 15% of all students in the TDSB. But there's this huge disparity across there. If you actually look at this one group with the wonderful name of University Graduate No Mobility, that means that they went into university, they stayed in university, and they graduated. So their single largest group, it's a bit under half of students. That's 5% of the students. So 1/3 of the overall TDSB proportion had students with a disability. On the other hand, the students who didn't get a high school diploma at all and didn't go on, that's at literally a third, 33%. That's the highest group. What's interesting about this, if you look at the 4 top categories, which are the 2 certificate categories, continuers, that means that when we looked at that, they still continued to be apprenticeship, and early leavers, which meant that they went in, but then they left without becoming getting a certificate. So those are our 4 groups. When you look at those 4 groups, they basically have all like somewhere noticeably above the and basically almost twice the TDSB average for some of them, but certainly basically somewhere between 4 or 5 times the proportion of students in terms of our the university graduates who stayed in one university. So that's the overall picture. In other words, we're looking at the overall picture of apprenticeship, we're looking at the overall picture of disability, and we're seeing this very large proportion of students both with certificates as well as those who are still continuing or those who've been in the left with disability. And with that, I'd like to sort of turn it over to David, who is going to talk a little bit more about the sort of more detailed analyses that we did.
Thank you, Rob. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to succinctly summarize the statistical analysis that we did, and I'll try to simplify the terminology to the best of my abilities. Essentially, what we did was we ran a series of regression models whereby our dependent variable is earnings from the tax records in 2020 dollars. And our key focal variable, which you'll see on the next slide, is the post-secondary pathway variable. And we run 4 models where we include the pathway variable first. Then we add controls for sociodemographic characteristics. We've got measures for disability, for gender, immigration status, socioeconomic status, and age at the start of grade 9. In our next model, we add the school variables from the Toronto District School Board. We have whether or not the students pass their language proficiency test. We have their grade 9 credit accumulation, their academic, whether their academic level, whether they're an applied or an academic program. We also have a measure for absenteeism, as well as their average grades in grade 9. And then in our final model, we add an interaction between the pathway variable and the disability variable. And that interaction is added to the model, whereby all the other variables I just described are included as well. So if we transition to the next slide, you'll see the pathway variable. This is the key focal variable in our analysis. And what we want to do is we want to compare various trades groupings. So if you look at the first line, you can see we have Red Seal graduates. So these are graduates from Red Seal trades programs. They would include, for example, the plumbers, the mechanics, the electricians. We have graduates of non-Red Seal trades programs. Then we also have a separate category for those who started a trades program, were still in the system during the end of the study period, but they hadn't yet graduated. We have a separate category for those who started in a trades program, but were not in the system at the end of the study period. So they're technically early school leavers. And we compare all 4 of these trades groups with university degree holders, college diploma graduates, those who graduated but translation, they transferred from one program to another. So they may have started in university and completed their program in college. They may have started in college and completed in university. And then all of these categories, all of these groups of students are compared to those who went to high school, got a high school diploma, but never continued to post-secondary education. So if we transition to the next slide, what we see here is a histogram of the earnings of all of the above post-secondary pathways separately for those with and without disabilities. So basically, these estimates that you see here are based on the values we got from Model 4. Translation, they're based on the interaction between post-secondary pathway and disability. And what you'll notice is if you look on the left-hand side, if we look at the outcomes, these are earnings in 2020 dollars of those of each of the trades profiles. So translation, Red Seal graduates, non-Red Seal graduates, trades students who are still in the system, and those who didn't complete their program. What you'll notice is that the difference between those with and without disabilities in terms of earnings is not statistically significant. However, if you look at the graphs or the bars on the right-hand side, the 4 different groupings, you'll notice that there is a statistically significant difference between those who have a disability and those who don't have a disability among university graduates, college graduates, those who are graduates of transfer programs, and those who completed high school but did not continue to post-secondary schooling. If we transition to the next slide, basically what we've done is we've converted that display that you saw on the previous slide to actual numerical values. And you'll see that the results on this slide are quite fascinating. If you look specifically at university graduates, you will see a stark contrast between those with and without a disability. So translation, if you have a disability, you can expect to earn approximately $6,100 less than your counterparts without a disability. If you look at the trades groupings, you'll notice, as I mentioned from the previous slide, that the difference in earnings between those with and without a disability is not statistically significant. In many instances, it's actually negligible. Translation, university programs in terms of labor market outcomes are least hospitable to students with disabilities. Moreover, if you compare the earnings profiles of those with and without disabilities across the pathways, you'll notice that if you have a disability, if you graduate from a trades program, a Red Seal trades program, you can expect to earn approximately $28,000 more than if you graduate from a university degree program. That difference for those without disabilities is only $24,000. So in each instance, going to a Red Seal trades program improves your labor market outcomes by, $24,000 to $28,000 respectively, depending on whether you don't have or do have a disability. So the bottom line for the story here is that trades programs, in terms of labor market outcomes, especially Red Seal programs, are advantageous in terms of earnings in the labor market for those with and without disabilities, particularly those without a disability. And I also want to point out that even if you don't graduate from a trades program, translation, you're still in the system, your earnings outcomes are quite comparable, if not favorable, to those who have university degrees. Now, as exciting as these findings might seem on the surface, there are some very significant caveats to these results that Rob's going to discuss next.
Okay, yeah. So having sort of said these pretty amazing things, now I get to go over and sort of say, well, here are some conditions. And so, in other words, we know that students with disabilities enter apprenticeship programs at a much higher rate than college and university programs. And so that's one thing that's very definitive. The one thing we're not totally certain about is the type of disability. That is, we have this general umbrella of what is considered to be disability in terms of special education needs in the TDSP, but we don't have any more precise information. So it could be that physical, sensory versus learning disabilities may have some difference in terms of who takes different post-secondary pathways. So we didn't actually look at the type of disability. Next slide, please. So the next thing here is, again, we have to put this one proviso here, is that at the end of the day, when we look at the full TDSP population, that less than 1% of all TDSP students in this cohort received the Red Seal certificate. And this is the one that had these really amazing sort of differences. So it's a very small group. It's still an important group. Even like how would you say 1% of 200 of over 100,000 is still a fair chunk of students. But we have to put that proviso. We're dealing with this fairly small proportion. Next slide. Let's see. The other thing is, we were looking here at, and I guess I should be more specific. We're looking at not comparing. We're looking at people like the first credential that they had. So this is of early days of people's post-school careers. Many of them may have started sort of a law school. If they're full-time, we wouldn't have been looking at them. But there's a lot of sort of so the people here are basically one credential and they're in the workforce that we've looked at in terms of university and college. We do know, of course, is that as people come in and get professional degrees, they get doctorates, they sort of law school and so on, these will lead to higher incomes than a single college or university credential. So what we're looking at here is at sort of the intermediate beginning process. So we don't really have the full picture. So we really have to look at, as usual, say more research needs to be done. Next slide. Also a lot of the big provisos here with like all of the big sort of income information is with the Red Seal certificate. One amazing thing is that we're talking about 97% of these folks being male. Just as a note, the 52% of all TDSB students are male. So going from 52 to 97, we're talking about a very, very, very disproportionately male population. They're somewhat more likely to live in higher income neighborhoods compared to other trade pathways. They're also least likely to be born outside Canada or speak a language other than English. They also have the most academic success among their trade groups, which is not to say that it's still sort of much more challenged population than looking at, say, the university population, but they're somewhat more likely to have success. Now, students who acquired a non-Red Seal certificate were more likely to be female, but we're still talking about 39% female versus 3% female. But it's still a predominantly male population, even amongst those with a non-Red Seal certificate. Final consideration, so the next slide here, so there are other things that we have to take a look at. So who completes versus enters different types of trade programs? We couldn't really look at that in this analysis. Another one is age. We do know that students who enter apprenticeship between the ages of 20 and 22 are much more likely to get a certificate than those who enter at an earlier age, up to like in 17 to 19, and those who enter somewhat later in their mid to late 20s. So that's another issue that we sort of really have to take a look at. Finally, this sort of the first a few years after again, this is something we heard to earlier. This is just the first few years after graduation from post-secondary, specifically from graduation versus university. So a lot of this is at the earlier stages. And again, I think this is showing the very useful beginning of a longer process. Maybe just a final slide here in terms of takeaways. So that we can get the next slide here. But we do know that students are often discouraged from considering apprenticeship as a post-secondary pathway, often for economic reasons. But if we're just looking in this process at the first credential in terms of post-secondary, some students may be very well served by a trades pathway, particularly in the Red Seal trades, especially if it's a good fit for the student. I have to say that includes being male at this point in terms of Red Seal, but it also is like personality, interests, learning preferences, hands-on, etc. And I think that we also have to look at the importance of completing the program. In other words, getting the certificate is where you get the full benefits. And that's something that's very evident here. This study provides evidence that some students with disabilities may find more economic success in a trades pathway than the college and university. Again, we noticed that this may vary by type of disability, and we need to follow these students for longer to get the full picture. But I think that this is showing that all students should be aware of the pros and cons of all potential pathways, including apprenticeship after high school, so that they can choose the best fit. And I think I'd sort of thank you. That's it for our presentation. Just want to sort of provide a few things like funding support and other types of support from ONCAT, TDSB, Stats Canada, the Social Science and Humanities Research Council, and not least the CRDCN. That is the research data centers in which we worked, who have been very, very helpful to us. And I think that's it for the presentation.